picture this. A man is standing high up on wooden scaffolding.
Right, inside an auditorium in Mexico City.
Exactly. And he's got a paintbrush in one hand, working furiously on this massive wall. But in his other hand, or, well, tucked firmly into his waistband, is a loaded pistol.
Yeah, he is definitely not painting in some quiet, sterile studio.
No, not at all. He's surrounded by right-wing students who are furious. I mean, they're protesting his work, threatening to pull him down and just destroy what he's creating. To him, the wall isn't just a canvas. It's a live battlefield.
It's such an arresting image, and it really perfectly encapsulates the environment of public art in the early 1920s.
Right.
We're looking at a time and place where painting wasn't, a polite hobby. It was a deeply dangerous, highly contested tool used to basically dictate the future of a nation.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're pulling from a really comprehensive Wikipedia article and various historical sources to unpack the explosive, completely larger-than-life story of the legendary Mexican muralist Diego Rivera.
And we're doing this because Rivera's story is, frankly, the ultimate masterclass in how to weaponize public space.
Oh, totally. And just to give you a sense of his lasting gravity, Rivera currently holds the auction record for a Latin American artist. Back in 2018, his 1931 painting called The Rivals sold for nearly $10 million.
Which is a staggering amount of money.
It is. But honestly, the financial valuation is probably the least interesting thing about him.
I completely agree. The money is just a byproduct of the myth. To really understand Rivera, we have to look at how he became a cornerstone of the Mexican mural movement.
Right, because his works are actually officially declared historical monuments by the Mexican government, right?
Yes, monumentos históricos. And they earned that status because Rivera used these simple forms, indigenous iconography and incredibly bold colors, to visually construct the narrative of a modern nation.
Out of the ashes of a revolution, essentially.
Exactly.
And we're going to get into all of that today, how he guarded his art with a gun, how he engaged in this bitter, highly public feud with the Rockefeller family.
Oh, that is a wild story.
It really is. And how he casually claimed in his own autobiography to have eaten human brains.
Yeah, we definitely have to unpack that later.
We will, I promise. But, you don't just wake up one day and decide to paint the entire history of a country on a 3-story wall. You have to be forged into that kind of person.
Right, there's a buildup.
So let's start with his origins. He was born in 1886 into a very comfortable, well-to-do family in Guanajuato, Mexico. But right out of the gate, there is a really profound tragedy.
Yeah, he had a twin brother, Carlos.
Right. And Carlos died when they were only 2 years old.
And that kind of early trauma often manifests in really unexpected ways. For Rivera, it seemed to trigger this compulsive need to visualize his world. By the age of 3, he was drawing relentlessly.
Just covering the walls of his house in sketches.
Which, is pretty standard toddler behavior.
Yeah, most parents would just hide the crayons or, put the kid in timeout.
But his parents did something highly unusual. They actually installed chalkboards and canvas across the walls of the house so he could just keep going.
It's crazy. It reminds me of that modern parenting strategy where you, hand a toddler an iPad to keep them occupied on a long flight.
Right, exactly.
Except that in this case, handing him the walls accidentally gave him the physical space to start thinking on this massive architectural scale.
They completely removed the boundaries of a standard sheet of paper. He learned really early on that art didn't have to be small or contained.
Wow, yeah. And there's another foundational element from his childhood we have to consider, and that's his heritage.
Right. His mother had Jewish converso ancestry.
And for those who might not know, these were Spanish ancestors who had been forced to convert from Judaism to Catholicism centuries earlier during the Inquisition.
Yeah. And Rivera himself never practiced the Jewish faith, but later in his life he wrote that this specific ancestry gave him a profound, quote, sympathy with the downtrodden masses.
And that empathy really becomes the engine of his entire career, doesn't it?
It does, but it takes a while to rev up. First, he gets a highly traditional art education. He studies in Mexico City, and then he manages to secure a government sponsorship to go to Europe.
And he ends up in Paris during a just incredibly fertile period for modern art.
Oh, absolutely. He's hanging out in Montparnasse with this legendary circle of artists. Amerigo Modigliani actually paints Rivera's portrait in 1914.
Which is just a crazy crossover of art history. And Rivera starts experimenting heavily with cubism during this time, right?
It does. And for anyone who might not be super familiar, Cubism is that movement pioneered by Picasso where you break objects apart and reassemble them from multiple angles.
Right, trying to show the whole truth of a subject rather than just, one single perspective.
Exactly. He does that for a while, then he sort of shifts into post-impressionism, playing with bolder colors and more emotional depth. He was really mastering the European avant-garde.
But European canvas painting was ultimately portable, right? It was private, created primarily to be sold to wealthy collectors to hang in their parlors.
Yeah, and that just didn't align with his growing desire to speak to the masses. The real catalyst for his life's work happens when he returns to Mexico in 1921.
Right, because he's brought back by Jose Vasconcelos, who was the Minister of Education at the time. And he brings him back to participate in this massive government-sponsored mural program.
We really have to set the scene here for you. Mexico has just come out of a brutal, decade-long revolution.
The country is totally fractured.
Right. A huge portion of the population is illiterate. So the government decides they need a way to communicate a new, unified national identity to the public.
And they decide they're going to do it by painting the walls of public buildings.
Exactly. When 90% of your population can't read a political pamphlet, you have to show them who they are. You have to give them a visual mythology.
And this is where Rivera adopts the fresco technique. I think it's really important to understand the mechanics of a fresco because it explains why his art was so permanent and so deeply contested.
Right, you don't just paint on a dry wall.
No. You apply wet lime plaster to the wall, and while it's still wet, you paint your image using water-based pigments. And as the plaster dries, this chemical reaction occurs.
The pigment actually binds with the plaster.
So the painting literally, well, chemically becomes part of the architecture. You can't just unhook a wire and carry it out of the room.
Precisely. To remove it, you basically have to destroy the wall itself.
Wow.
And because it's so permanent and because it's in a government building, painting a fresco is a really aggressive claim on public space. You are defining the official history.
Which brings us right back to that opening image we discussed. It's January 1922, and Rivera is painting his first significant mural called Creation in the National Preparatory School Auditorium.
And the political climate is so volatile, and the idea of this new revolutionary public art is so controversial to conservative factions that he has to bring that pistol to work.
Just to defend himself from right-wing students while he paints, it's an incredible visual. He is quite literally fighting for control of the narrative.
He really is.
And this is where we have to talk about the core fuel of his work, which is the collision of paint, politics, and propaganda. Now, just a quick note for you as we get into this next segment.
Yeah, this is important.
Rivera was a hardcore, dedicated Marxist. And we're going to explore his communist beliefs today because you simply cannot understand his art without understanding his politics.
You really can't. They are completely intertwined.
Exactly. But to be totally clear, we are unpacking these ideologies purely as historical facts based on our source material. We're not taking a stance on them. We're just explaining how they drove his life and his brushstrokes.
Right. It's just necessary context. Because for Rivera, art and politics were the exact same discipline.
So in the autumn of 1922, the same year he painted that first mural, he officially joined the Mexican Communist Party.
And he viewed his murals as a way to champion the working class, elevate the peasant, and glorify the 1910 revolution.
Let's look at how that actually played out on the walls. Between 1923 and 1927, he paints a chapel at the Chapingo Autonomous University of Agriculture.
Oh, this is a masterpiece. People often refer to this as the Sistine Chapel of the Americas.
Yeah, he creates this massive fresco titled Fertile Land. And the imagery is striking. I mean, he paints a giant hammer and sickle joined by a star right into the ceiling.
But he blends it with indigenous history, which is so unique.
Right, he shows the corpses of real-life revolutionary heroes like Emiliano Zapata and Otilio Montano buried in the ground.
And their decomposing bodies are shown fertilizing a massive maize field above them.
The mechanics of that visual metaphor are just brilliant.
They really are. He is taking the ancient indigenous Aztec understanding of sacrifice in agriculture, the idea that death feeds the earth to bring new life.
And he's mapping it directly onto modern Marxist revolution.
Exactly. The art critic Antonio Rodriguez actually noted how Rivera glorified those who died for a political ideal by showing them reborn as the very crop that feeds the nation.
But Rivera didn't stop at political figures, did he? He wove his own messy personal life right into this grand narrative.
Oh, he definitely did. In that very same Fertile Land mural, he paints his second wife at the time, Guadalupe Marin, as a nude, fertile goddess.
Heavily evocative of the Aztec goddess of maize.
Yes.
Okay, I have to pause here. He's mixing deep indigenous mythology with mid-20th century communist iconography, and then he just throws his own wife into the mix as a literal deity.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
Yeah.
How is a guy who paints his wife as a fertility god trusted to build a serious national identity? I mean, is he trying to create an entirely new visual religion, or is he just being intensely arrogant?
Well, it's a fair challenge. I would argue he was doing both, and honestly, he probably saw no contradiction between the two.
Really?
Yeah, Rivera understood that all effective propaganda operates a bit like religion. It needs martyrs, it needs gods, and it needs a really compelling story.
Ah, I see.
By putting his wife, his friends, and ancient deities on the same wall as political martyrs, he was essentially collapsing time.
He wanted the viewer walking through that chapel to feel that the ancient gods, the recent revolution, and the people currently breathing in the room were all part of one continuous sacred story.
Exactly. And he naturally positioned himself as the orchestrator of that entire story.
And he pushes that orchestration even further with some pretty severe real-world consequences. In 1928, he paints a mural called In the Arsenal.
Right.
And he paints his new love interest, the iconic artist Frida Kahlo, handing out munitions to workers. He also includes prominent real-life communists in the crowd.
Yeah, like the Cuban activist Julio Antonio Mella and an Italian communist named Vittorio Vidali.
And then life imitates art in the worst possible way. In 1929, Mella is assassinated in the street.
And the primary suspect is that same Italian, Vidali.
The fallout from this was immense, right? Because Rivera had painted the two men together in this revolutionary setting just before the murder.
Yes. Rivera was actually accused by some people of having advanced knowledge of the assassination.
Wow. Just because of the painting.
Exactly. His art was viewed as a literal blueprint of political factions. And to compound the chaos, that same year, the Mexican Communist Party expelled him.
Why?
They suspected he held Trotskyite sympathies.
We should probably define that for the listener really quick. A Trotskyite, following the Russian revolutionary Leon Trotsky, believed in a permanent global revolution of the working class,
Right.
which put them deeply at odds with the mainstream Stalinist regime in the Soviet Union, who basically just wanted to consolidate power in one state.
Exactly. And the party was right to be suspicious of Rivera, weren't they?
Oh yes, they were entirely correct. Rivera was heavily aligned with Trotsky's views. In fact, a few years later, when Trotsky was exiled and fleeing Stalin's assassins, he actually lived with Rivera and Frida Kahlo in Mexico.
It's just wild. The boundaries between Rivera's frescoes, his political affiliations, and his daily life simply did not exist.
No, this guy is living in a constant state of volatility. And eventually, that volatility spills over the borders of Mexico and onto the international stage. Which leads us to what is arguably his most famous controversy.
Rivera versus Rockefeller.
Yes, a phenomenal clash of titans.
Yeah.
Two completely opposing worldviews colliding over a single wall.
So, despite being a very public, very vocal communist, Rivera's fame is so immense that he starts taking major commissions in the United States from massive capitalists.
Which seems like a huge contradiction right out of the gate.
It is. He goes to Detroit and paints the Detroit industry murals, which are funded in part by Edsel Ford, the son of Henry Ford.
And then comes the absolute apex of this tension. It's 1933, and he is commissioned by the Rockefeller family, specifically John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s son, Nelson, to paint a massive mural for the lobby of the brand new RCA building at Rockefeller Center in New York City.
The mural is titled Man at the Crossroads.
And Rockefeller Center was meant to be this ultimate monument to American capitalism and progress.
Right, so hiring a known Marxist provocateur was a calculated risk by the Rockefellers. They wanted the prestige of having the world's most famous muralist.
But Rivera, predictably, decided to test the absolute limits of that patronage.
Oh, he pushed it as far as it could go.
It's kind of like a modern tech billionaire hiring a famous rogue anti-establishment hacker to build their corporate cybersecurity network, and then being shocked when the hacker leaves an anti-capitalist backdoor in the code.
That is a perfect analogy.
Rivera is given this massive wall, and he deliberately paints a prominent portrait of the Marxist revolutionary Vladimir Lenin right into the center of the composition.
Alongside other pro-worker, anti-capitalist imagery.
And the reaction was swift, wasn't it?
Oh, the press erupted, the public
Yeah.
protested. So Nelson Rockefeller politely wrote to Rivera, asking him to replace Lenin's face with that of an unknown man.
And Rivera flatly refused.
He did. He offered a compromise to paint Abraham Lincoln on the opposite side to balance it out, but he absolutely would not remove Lenin. He stood completely firm on his artistic integrity.
So the Rockefellers make a pretty brutal decision. Because it's a fresco, as we discussed earlier, they can't just take it down and put it in storage.
Right. It is chemically bonded to the building.
So they pay Rivera his full commission, ban him from the site, and eventually the management company has workers take chisels and literally smash the masterpiece off the wall, destroying it completely.
It is an agonizing thought for an art historian, though thankfully we do have a few illicit photographs taken by an assistant before the destruction.
Thank goodness for that assistant.
Yeah. But the fallout from this was catastrophic for Rivera's American career. A major commission he had lined up for the Chicago World's Fair was abruptly canceled. He was essentially blacklisted.
But Rivera was a total genius at PR. He doesn't just slink back to Mexico quietly.
Not at all.
He issues this incredibly fiery press statement. He announces that he is going to take the money the Rockefellers paid him, because remember, he still got his check.
He sure did.
And he says he is going to use their capitalist money to repaint that exact same mural, Lenin and all, over and over again wherever he is asked, until the Rockefeller funds run out.
It is just the ultimate act of defiance.
Yeah.
And it forces us to ask a question that still dominates discussions about public art today.
Which is?
Who truly owns it? Is it the person who holds the deed to the building and paid for the plaster? Is it the artist whose intellectual and creative labor birthed the image? Or is it the public, the people who actually have to walk past it and live with it every single day?
Legally, obviously, Rockefeller owned the wall. He had the right to smash it. But historically and culturally, Rivera absolutely won that war.
Without a doubt.
In 1934, he goes back to Mexico City and repaints the entire mural in the Palacio de Bellas Artes, renaming it Man, Controller of the Universe. The controversy just made the artwork immortal.
Exactly. Rivera realized something really crucial during the Rockefeller incident. He realized that the controversy itself, the narrative surrounding the art, was just as powerful as the fresco technique.
Which brings us to the final, and frankly, the most bizarre chapter of Rivera's life. Because after the Rockefeller clash, Rivera seems to realize that to maintain his power, his own personal mythology needs to be as indestructible and massive as his murals.
He really leans heavily into self-mythologizing.
He does. And we have to look at the sheer turbulence of his private life to understand this. I mean, he was married 4 times.
Most famously, of course, to Frida Kahlo.
Right. They married in 1929. He was 42. She was 22. It was a notoriously volatile relationship, deeply passionate, but filled with mutual infidelities.
They divorced in 1939, only to realize they couldn't stay apart, and remarried a year later in San Francisco.
He just thrived on chaos. And alongside his chaotic love life, he aggressively pushed his personal beliefs into the public sphere. For instance, he was a staunch, uncompromising atheist.
Yes.
In his 1947 mural Dreams of a Sunday in the Alameda, he paints a historical figure holding a placard that clearly reads, God does not exist.
And in a deeply Catholic country like Mexico, that was a staggering provocation. The public reaction was furious. There were riots, the mural was vandalized, but Rivera completely refused to remove the inscription.
So what happened to it?
Consequently, the painting was hidden behind a screen and not shown to the public for 9 solid years.
9 years. And he explicitly defended it, saying, quote, I am an atheist, and I consider religions to be a form of collective neurosis.
He's drawing a hard, unyielding line in the sand.
But this is where the contradictions just make my head spin.
Yeah.
He's a hardcore Marxist and a staunch atheist. Yet in 1926, he joined an organization called AMORC.
Yes, the ancient mystical order Rosicrucians.
Yeah, the Rosicrucians. It's an esoteric occult organization that claims to hold ancient mystical and spiritual truths passed down through centuries.
Which is the furthest thing from the materialist, grounded philosophy of Marxism.
Right. And it gets weirder.
Yeah.
Decades later, in 1954, he tries to rejoin the Communist Party. They interrogate him about his MRC membership, assuming it's some sort of, capitalist Freemasonry. And Rivera defends himself by claiming he only joined to infiltrate a Yankee organization on behalf of the communists.
Oh, wow.
But simultaneously, he's telling people that AMORC is based on ancient Egyptian occult knowledge. handed down from Queen Nefertiti.
It is a dizzying web of contradictions.
And then there is the autobiography, published posthumously in 1960.
Oh, this car.
He claims that back in 1904, while living in Mexico, he engaged in cannibalism.
Yeah.
He writes that he and some friends pooled their money to purchase fresh cadavers from the city morgue, specifically to eat them. And I'm quoting directly from the source material here. He claimed he particularly relished, quote, women's brains and vinaigrette.
Let me jump in here to immediately clarify that historians and biographers overwhelmingly consider this claim to be entirely fabricated.
It's a lie.
It is an elaborate lie.
But why? I mean, why does a man who causes a 9-year national scandal, insisting that religion is a neurosis, then turn around, join an Egyptian occult group, and write a book claiming he eats human brains? Is he losing his mind, or is this just the most unhinged PR strategy in history?
It's the latter, definitely. Rivera understood causality. He knew that to paint massive, controversial things on public walls, he had to make himself an unavoidable force of nature.
That makes sense.
If he was just a painter, he could be easily dismissed. But if he was a brain-eating, occult-infiltrating, communist provocateur who fights billionaires and marries brilliant women...
He becomes a myth.
Exactly. He kept the bourgeoisie, his patrons, and the public constantly off balance. He controlled the narrative of his life just as tightly as he controlled the composition of his frescoes.
And that command of narrative is why we are still talking about him today. He didn't just leave us with murals. He left us with cultural DNA.
That's a great way to put it.
Like in that same 1947 mural where he wrote God does not exist, he included a skeletal figure wearing a large, elegant hat. He took an older, satirical sketch created by the printmaker Jose Guadalupe Posada, expanded on it, gave her indigenous features, and cemented her into the artwork. He called her La Calavera Catrina.
And today, that exact figure is the single most recognizable icon associated with the Day of the Dead globally.
It is the perfect encapsulation of his genius. He had the ability to take a fragment of a history, filter it through his immense, highly politicized vision, and bond it permanently into the culture.
He weaponized imagery better than almost anyone in the 20th century.
So to pull all these threads together for you, Diego Rivera was a man born in the aftermath of a revolution, who synthesized deep indigenous history, radical Marxist politics, and a massive, chaotic personal mythology.
He took art out of the polite, sterile galleries, bonded it chemically to the architecture of his country, and forced everyone walking down the street to confront it.
And that is the exact lens we'd encourage you to use going forward.
Absolutely. The next time you walk past a public monument or a sprawling mural in your own city, don't just look at the colors. Consider the invisible mechanics behind it.
Think about the funding, the political compromises, the battles over narrative, and the sheer defiance it took to claim that space.
Public art is never merely decorative. It is a permanent argument about who we are and what we value.
It's the X-ray of a society's fractures and ideals, painted for everyone to see. And Rivera didn't shy away from those fractures. He painted himself, his wives, his political idols, and his enemies right into the center of them.
He really did.
So I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought experiment to explore on your own. Imagine you were handed a massive wall in the center of your city today and commissioned to paint a fresco that captured the absolute most volatile, clashing contradictions of our current era.
It's a pretty daunting challenge to visualize.
It really is. What impossible combinations of people, ideologies, and symbols would you force to share the exact same wall?
That's a profound question.
And that's exactly what Rivera did every single day, with a pistol in his waistband. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the brilliant, chaotic world of Diego Rivera.